Good afternoon, students. Today is Friday, 24 September 2021. This lecture is meant for yesterday's class. I told you that I was running a day late this week. Now let's look ahead. On Tuesday, the next time we would ordinarily be meeting, you will be going into Canvas and taking your first exam. So don't go to class on Tuesday. I won't be there. The door will be locked. The next time I see anybody in person will be Thursday, next Thursday, the 30th of September. So next week looks like this. Tuesday, you will take your exam at home or wherever it's convenient for you. Wednesday, I will record and post my video for Thursday's class. Remember, I'm going to be posting videos probably for the rest of the semester. And that means you can stay home and not go to class if that's your preference. Thursday, I will be in the classroom, and what we'll do is have a discussion. Yesterday, I met with a few students. We had what I consider a wonderful discussion of my discussion questions that I had posted on Canvas. So maybe some more of you would like to come and check it out. If you go to a discussion session and you don't like it, then you can stop going. But you won't know whether you like it unless you try it. So maybe you should come to class on Thursday, the 30th of September, and see what it's all about. Okay, now the exam on Tuesday is on Canvas. When you go to Canvas, the first thing you do, of course, is find the Philosophy of Religion course, and I assume you know how to do that because you've been getting the handouts and watching my videos posted there. When you go to this course on Canvas, along the left side, you'll see a number of words. Click on the word quizzes. I know it's not a quiz, it's an examination, but it's in the section called quizzes. When you click that, it should open up something called First Examination, and that's the one you need to click. Make sure that when you start the exam, you're ready to complete it, okay? Because once you start, you have 75 minutes to finish it. And you should take that exam somewhere between 8 o'clock and in the morning and 8 o'clock in the evening. So choose a 75-minute period during that 12-hour block of time. Make sure you take note of your score when you finish. It should show it to you somewhere. Now, I haven't taken an exam, so I don't know what it looks like. But students tell me that when their exam is over, they can see their score. Once I get all the scores, I will compile some statistics and prepare a handout for you. And I may say a few words about it in the next video. Okay, so we've got a big exam coming up. Please put in the time, take it seriously. I may have told you that it's always sad to me to see a good student who doesn't properly prepare for the exam, who doesn't do very well, and that poor score at the beginning of the course causes the student to do poorly overall. You may find that you can no longer even get an A in the course because you've done so badly on the first exam. So take it seriously, give it the attention that it deserves. If you want a good grade in this course, you need to do consistently well. And that means you need to do well on all 3 of the exams. Okay, enough about the exam. I mentioned the discussion session. I will continue to post what I call discussion questions, and you can tell for any given day what we will be discussing. And the purpose of that is to engage with my students. The material, the things that we talk about during the discussions will not be tested on the exam. So that should make it a little bit more casual than the classroom would ordinarily be. So we'll see how it goes. When we meet after the exam, I'm going to lecture on Wednesday, I told you. The lecture will be on the introduction and chapter 1 of the little book by Richard Swinburne. So make sure you've acquired that book. If you haven't already, make sure you acquire it very soon so that you can start reading it. We're going to work our way through it. It'll take several class periods. We're going to do the introduction in chapter 1 on Wednesday and Thursday next week, the first time we meet after the exam. Okay, that's enough preliminary matter. Let's get started. We're going over this famous essay by William Rowe entitled The Problem of Evil and Some Varieties of Atheism. We've covered parts 1 and 2, and now today we're going to finish up with part 3. The question that Rowe poses and for himself and answers is this. He states it on page 335. What position should the informed atheist take concerning the rationality of theistic belief? So the theist has to take a position about the rationality of theistic belief. What should that position be? Now the word should appears in that question. And the word should is one of those words that can be used in different ways. Sometimes it's used in a moral way, as if I said, you should donate money or donate more money to charities. I'm making a moral judgment. The word should means should if you want to do the morally right thing. Sometimes we use the word should in what I call a prudential sense. I might say, for example, if you want a good yield in your garden this year, you should use fertilizer. I use the word should. I'm not making a moral judgment. What I'm saying is it would be in your interest, given your goal of a large harvest, it would be in your interest to use fertilizer in your garden. So we sometimes use the word should in a moral way. We sometimes use it in a prudential way. I think, however, that Rowe is using it in a third way here. Rowe is using it in what we might call an epistemic way. When Rowe says, what position should the atheist take, I think what he's saying is, what position is it most reasonable for the atheist to take regarding the rationality of theistic belief? Right? What's the most reasonable position for an atheist to take? And what is Rowe's answer? Rowe says on page 335 that he will, quote, discuss and defend the position of friendly atheism, unquote. So Rowe asks a question and then he provides his answer. And the main thing we're going to be doing today is looking at different responses that an atheist may take and distinguishing between them. Rowe eventually is going to argue for what he calls friendly atheism. But before we get to that, before we get to the three reactions or responses that an atheist might take, let's make some important distinctions. Some of these will be fairly obvious to you, some might not. Let's first of all make a distinction between a belief being true or false and a belief being justified or unjustified. Now, Rowe uses the phrase rationally justified, and I may just omit the word rationally from now on. It's just a mouthful. So let me say that again. A given belief could be either true or false. Some beliefs are true, some are false. We might also talk about whether a given belief is justified or not, whether it's justified or unjustified. Okay? Now, for any proposition P, let the letter P stand for the proposition. For any proposition P, it cannot logically be the case both that P and not P. In other words, whatever proposition P is, it can't be both true and false. That's called the law of non-contradiction. No proposition is both true and false. No proposition is both true and not true. Okay? And so Rowe is not going to challenge that at all or question that. He takes that for granted. A given proposition or a given belief is either true or it's false. And it can't be both. But can't it be rational for somebody to believe P at the same time that it's rational for somebody to believe non-P or not P? In other words, can it be rational for one person to believe P and another person to believe the denial of P? Rowe thinks it can. Rowe thinks that that's possible. He says on page 340, surely the truth of a belief is not a necessary condition of someone's being rationally justified in having that belief. Now, suppose it were. Suppose it were a necessary condition of being justified in believing something, that the belief be true. Then anyone who ever believed that the earth is flat, which we know is false, anyone who ever believed that the earth is flat, even if that person had the best available instruments and made the most careful observations, that person would be irrational. Why? Because the proposition that the earth is flat is false. And on the view we're considering, whenever a proposition is false, it's irrational to believe it. It's unjustified to believe it. But surely we don't want to say that, do we? Don't we want to say of certain people who believed that the earth is flat, that they were rationally justified in believing that the earth is flat? After all, they used the best instruments, scientific instruments that they had available to them. They made careful observations, and based upon those observations, they formed a belief that the earth is flat. Don't we want to say that while that belief was false, we know that now that it was false, the person who believed it was rationally justified in doing so? So we want to distinguish between a belief being true and someone being justified in believing it. In fact, there are 4 possibilities that I have represented in a diagram in my lecture notes, which I've made available to you. Let's go through and look at some examples of each of the 4 categories. You'll notice that on the left side of my diagram, I have a belief being true and a belief being false. It's got to be one or the other, and it can't be both. Across the top of my diagram, I have written rationally justified and not rationally justified. So there are 4 categories, and I've numbered them 1, 2, 3, and 4. The first category is a true belief that is rationally justified. We could call it a justified true belief. Category 2 is a true belief that is not rationally justified. We could call that an unjustified true belief. Category 3 is a false belief that is nonetheless rationally justified. So we could call that a justified false belief. And category 4 is a false belief that is not rationally justified. So we could call that an unjustified false belief. And here are examples of those 4 categories. Number 1, imagine a careful observer of American politics who forms the belief in early September 2021, which has already passed. This person forms a belief in early September 2021 that Joe Biden is President of the United States. What should we say about that? Well, it's a true belief, first of all. I hope you agree with that. Joe Biden is indeed the President of the United States in early September 2021. And secondly, because this person is a careful observer of American politics, we would say that this person is justified in believing that. So this person has a justified true belief. We might even want to go further and say that this person knows, this person has knowledge that Joe Biden is the President of the United States in early September 2021. Now, I keep mentioning that because, as you know, presidents have died in office, presidents have resigned from office, and it may be that a president one day will be removed from office for disability. So you always, when you say that so-and-so is president, you need to specify a time, and I did that. Here's an example of category 2. Knowing little about American politics, I guess that Ulysses S. Grant was the 18th President of the United States. So I formed the belief that Ulysses S. Grant was the 18th President of the United States. How did I form that belief? I guessed, right? I know little about American politics or American history. I simply flat out guessed, and guess what? I was right. It was a lucky guess. Ulysses S. Grant was indeed the 18th President of the United States. In fact, we can put it in the present tense. He is the 18th President. He will always be the 18th President of the United States. So that would be an example of category 2. I have a true belief, but it's only through luck or by accident. So clearly we would want to say in this case that I have an unjustified but true belief. And because it's unjustified, no one would say that I know it. You can't know something without having good reasons for believing it or being justified in believing it. What about category 3? Now I have to tell a little bit of a story. I'm going to use a character named Jethro. And I use that because Jethro was a character in the TV series The Beverly Hillbillies. And in that series, he played kind of a dunce, someone who was not just goofy, but ignorant of many facts and maybe a little bit stupid. Now, in real life, the character who played Jethro was Max Baer, and he was quite well educated. In fact, I believe he studied philosophy at Santa Clara University. So here was a very smart guy playing a dummy on TV. But anyway, let's take the character Jethro. Jethro, we can say, knows little about American politics or history. His friends, however, know a great deal about those things, and Jethro knows that they know a great deal. He knows that his friends are steeped in American history and politics. Now, one day, his friends, intending to play a prank on Jethro, tell him that Ulysses S. Grant was the 17th President of the United States. Remember, they're playing a joke on him. They know that he was not the 17th President, but that's what they tell Jethro. Jethro, relying upon their testimony, and he relied on it because he believed that they know a lot of facts about American politics and history, Jethro relies on their testimony and comes to believe that Ulysses S. Grant was the 17th President of the United States. Now, unbeknownst to Jethro, his friends are playing a practical joke on him. Grant was not the 17th President. I told you a moment ago he was the 18th President. So what do we have here? We have a justified false belief. The belief is that Grant was the 17th President. That's the actual belief Jethro had, but that's false. And yet, because he formed that belief in a reliable way, we would say that he's justified in believing it. Right? He's justified because his friends testified that Grant was the 17th President. Jethro knows that they know a lot about politics and history, and he had no reason to think they were playing a practical joke on him. We have to assume that. So Jethro relied in good faith upon their representations. He formed the belief, and lo and behold, it was false. But he had a justified false belief. Finally, category 4, knowing little about American politics or history, I guess that Ulysses S. Grant was the 18th President. I'm sorry, start over. We've done that one already. Category 4, knowing little about American politics or history, I formed the belief that Ulysses S. Grant was the 17th President of the United States. Once again, I guessed. Earlier, I guessed correctly. It was a lucky guess. This time, my wild guess is incorrect. So what do we have here? We have a false belief, and because I formed the belief in an unreliable way, we would say that my belief is unjustified. So my belief has two problems. First, it's false as a matter of fact, and second, I didn't form it in a proper way, and so I lack justification for believing it. So my point in doing all this is to make a distinction between the truth or falsity of a belief on the one hand and the respectability of the belief on the other hand. And by that I mean the justification for the belief, if any. A belief can be either justified or unjustified, just as it can be either true or false. So let's start applying this to the case of theism and atheism. Now, where would Rowe put his belief in this diagram? Rowe, as you know, is an atheist. Rowe would say that his belief that there is no God is in category 1. Right? Rowe would say that his belief is true and he's justified in believing that there's no God, based upon his argument from pointless evil that we looked at the other day. And where would Rowe put Plantinga's belief? Remember, Alvin Plantinga is a theist. A theist. He believes in God. Rowe would put Plantinga in category 3. So take a look. Category 3 is where you put a false belief for which there is nonetheless justification. And Rowe is going to argue in a moment that Plantinga, while he has a false belief that God exists, is nonetheless justified in believing that God exists. That's what Rowe calls friendly atheism. It's where you think that at least some theists are rationally justified in believing that God exists. Now, let's flip things around. Where would Plantinga put himself? Plantinga, the theist, would put himself in category 1. Plantinga would say that his belief that God exists is true and that he has justification for it. That's category 1. Where would Plantinga put Rowe? Rowe believes that there is no God. Plantinga would say, sorry, Rowe, but your belief is false. There is a God. And I assume that Plantinga, being a friendly theist, would say that Rowe is justified in his atheism, perhaps because of his argument from pointless evil. Now, I don't know this. It may well be that Plantinga is an unfriendly theist. Plantinga may actually think that Rowe and maybe any other atheist has no justification for disbelieving in God. So I'm guessing what Plantinga is. Is Plantinga a friendly atheist? A friendly theist or an unfriendly theist? I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that Plantinga is a friendly theist, but I could be wrong about that. Rowe tells us, so we don't have to guess. Rowe says, I, Rowe, am a friendly atheist. So we know where he stands. Let's turn now to the 3 varieties of atheism that we've just been talking about. Let's distinguish between what Rowe calls unfriendly atheism, friendly atheism, and a third type called indifferent atheism. Rowe says on page 340 that these are 3 major positions an atheist might take. And he also says these positions are about not the truth or falsity of belief, but about the rationality of the theist's belief. What is the theist's belief? It's the belief that there is a God, an omnipotent, omniscient, perfectly good God. So let's take these one at a time. And this obviously is something I can test you easily on in a multiple choice question or a true-false question. Unfriendly atheism. Let's begin with that. Rowe says on page 340 that this is the position that, quote, nobody is rationally justified in believing that the theistic God exists. Now that's a strong position. An atheist might take that position and say, no theist, not Plantinga, not Swinburne, nobody, however intelligent, however factually well-informed, no theist is rationally justified in believing in God. Are there people who take that position? I think so. Someone like Richard Dawkins probably goes in this category. If you read some of the things Richard Dawkins has written, such as The God Delusion, he might argue that not only is theism false in that there's no God, but that no theist is justified in believing in God. So Dawkins' view is something like this. Theists are not only mistaken, as a matter of fact, in their belief that God exists, but they're irrational in believing that God exists. They're, as Rowe would put it, not rationally justified in believing that God exists. Okay, number 2, friendly atheism. You might think that this is the view that all theists are rationally justified, but that's not it. The view is that some theists are rationally justified in believing that the theistic God exists. That's a quotation from page 340 as well. Notice that if you're a friendly atheist, you can also believe that some theists are not rationally justified in believing in God. And that, I think, is Rowe's position. I'm pretty sure it is. Rowe's view, if you look at the whole thing, is that some theists are justified and some are not. Rowe does not hold the view, which is crazy, that all theists are rationally justified. How so? Well, a person might believe in God without paying any attention to evidence or argument. A person may have been taught to believe in God by his or her religious authorities and or parents and simply never give the matter any further thought. Someone may form a belief in God early in life, in fact, before the person's rational faculties are really developed, and simply retain that belief throughout life, far into adulthood. And the person may die after living a long life, still believing in God, but never having examined the evidence on both sides of the question, never having looked at the arguments at all. It's just kind of an inertia. You believe and you keep believing for the remainder of your life or for some period of your life. So Rowe would say of a person like that, that person is not only mistaken in the sense of having a false belief that God exists, but also irrational. Rowe would say that person is not rationally justified in believing that God exists. So Rowe's position is that some theists are rationally justified. Which ones? Well, probably people like Plantinga, Swinburne, a philosopher named William Wainwright, who co-authored a book with Rowe. I'm sure Rowe would say of Wainwright that he is, while mistaken about the existence of God, at least rationally justified in believing that God exists. So it would be people who have examined the arguments, who have looked for evidence, searched far and wide for evidence both for and against the existence of God. It's those people, Rowe would say, who are rationally justified, even though, in Rowe's view, they have a false belief. What's the third possibility? It's called indifferent atheism. Here's how Rowe describes it on page 340. The atheist, in this case, may hold no belief concerning whether any theist is or isn't rationally justified in believing that the theistic God exists. So, friendly atheism is the view that at least some theists are rationally justified. Unfriendly atheism is the view that no theist is rationally justified. Indifferent atheism is the view that is the absence of a view on that question. An indifferent atheist is indifferent with regard to the question of whether any theist is justified in believing in God. And it may be because the atheist hasn't even thought about that question. Someone might be an atheist and simply never give any thought to whether theists are justified in their belief. Okay, notice that there are three varieties of theism as well as atheism. There could be a friendly theist. A friendly theist, presumably, would be a theist, that is, a believer in God, who believes that at least some atheists are rationally justified in disbelieving in God. An unfriendly theist would be a theist who believes that no atheist is rationally justified in disbelieving in God. And a moment ago I said I'm not sure which of those categories Alvin Plantinga is in, although I'll give him the benefit of the doubt since he's a nice person, that he thinks that at least some of the atheists are rationally justified. And finally, there's indifferent theism. This is a theist who hasn't given any thought to whether atheists are justified or has given it some thought but hasn't arrived at a conclusion. All right, let's turn to a case that is designed to illustrate some of these points. It's a case Rowe invented, and we'll call it the Hawaii case. And I think it's best just for me to read a little bit of it from the article. I'm reading from page 340, first column near the bottom. And it's just a few sentences. Suppose your friends see you off on a flight to Hawaii. Hours after takeoff, they learn that your plane has gone down at sea. After a 24-hour search, no survivors have been found. Under these circumstances, they are rationally justified in believing that you have perished. But it is hardly rational for you to believe this as you bob up and down in your life vest, wondering why the search planes have failed to spot you. Indeed, to amuse yourself while awaiting your fate, you might very well reflect on the fact that your friends are rationally justified in believing that you are now dead, a proposition you disbelieve and are rationally justified in disbelieving. So here we have a case where people have different types of evidence, and they arrive at different conclusions, and yet both of them are rationally justified. Your friends believe that you are dead. That's the proposition. You are dead. They believe it. It's false because you're still alive. They just don't know it. Is their belief justified? Rowe says it is, right? Very few people survive under those conditions, and yet you have, right? Maybe it's a fluke. You're lucky. And yet your friends are rationally justified in believing the falsehood that you are dead. You, on the other hand, believe that you are alive. You believe it's false that you are dead, and you have good reasons for that belief as well. So take the proposition that you are dead. You believe that it's false, and you're justified in believing so. They believe that it's true, and they're justified in believing so. And yet it can't be both true and false that you're dead at a particular moment. So this is a nice illustration provided by Rowe of the fact that two people can have contradictory beliefs, meaning that they can't both be correct, and yet they can still both be justified in what they believe. Now, Rowe goes on to apply that to the case of theism and atheism. The last sentence of that paragraph goes like this: so too, perhaps an atheist may be rationally justified in his atheistic belief, and yet hold that some theists are rationally justified in believing just the opposite of what he believes. So maybe I omitted one aspect of the Hawaii case. You are bobbing up and down in the water, and you believe that you are not dead. And you, of course, believe that you have rational grounds for believing that. You also know or suspect that your friends believe that you are dead and that they are rationally justified in believing that. So your position is that while your friends have a false belief, namely that you're dead, they are nonetheless justified in believing it. Okay, so that's the Hawaii case, and that's what it's designed to illustrate. So let's conclude the section and the article with some thoughts. Rowe, in his conclusion, expects trouble. The conclusion, I would say, is the final paragraph. Rowe expects trouble. Here's what he writes on page 341. He says, I'm aware that the central points of the paper are not likely to be warmly received by many philosophers, unquote. So Rowe senses trouble. He thinks that many philosophers, at least some, will not be happy with what he has written in this article. And you might wonder, which point in particular does Rowe think will not be warmly received? I think he's referring at least to his friendliness toward theists. I think that some philosophers reading Rowe's essay will say that he's gone over to the enemy, or at least has given aid and comfort to the enemy. Now, it's unfortunate that I'm using the term enemy here, maybe opponent, but those are the phrases that we use, right? Going over to the enemy, giving aid and comfort to the enemy. If we think of theists and atheists as being at war, as being enemies, then those phrases make sense. Now, Rowe seems to think that both theists and atheists tend to be unfriendly. He says at the top of page 341, second column, philosophers who are atheists tend to be tough-minded, holding that there are no good reasons for supposing that theism is true. And he goes on to imply that many theists are unfriendly in the same way. Both of them are dug in on the battlefield, and they're not willing to give any ground to the other. Rowe, however, is. Rowe says, it's unfortunate that some of my atheistic colleagues are unfriendly, but I think friendly atheism is the way to go. And he knows that the unfriendly atheists will view him as giving aid and comfort to theists or the enemy. And why do you suppose it is, if it is the case, that theists and atheists are unfriendly? It's certainly possible for an atheist to be friendly. It's certainly possible for a theist to be friendly. After all, when you're a friendly atheist, you're saying the following two things. Imagine Rowe talking to Plantinga. Rowe says to Plantinga, with all respect, Al, your belief that God exists is false. And I've tried valiantly to prove it that it's false. You may not be persuaded, but I think I've produced adequate proofs or at least good arguments. But fortunately for you, Al, I do believe that your belief in God is justified, that you're wrong in your belief, but nonetheless justified in having it. And I suspect that Plantinga would say the same to Rowe. False belief, justified in holding it. Hasn't Rowe built a bridge of a sort between theism and atheism? Maybe that was his intention in this essay. You know that Rowe has a background in religion. He was, for part of his life, a theist, a devout one, in fact. You know that from reading his essay, Friendly Atheism Revisited, which I assigned to you. Rowe describes his path from theism to atheism. Rowe, I assume, never lost his respect for theists. After all, they were his soulmates for some time in his life. How could he turn that off like a spigot? Right? How could he, having respected certain theists, have come to disrespect them or lack respect for them once he became an atheist? So Rowe, I think, in this essay is trying to build not only philosophical bridges between theists and atheists, in the sense that each can believe that the other is rationally justified, but I think he's trying to build personal bridges as well. Maybe philosophers who disagree on the existence of God should turn down the temperature a little bit, pay more attention to what the others are saying and why they're saying it. Look at the arguments and evidence each side provides. Like I said the other day, the world as we experience it is ambiguous. There is evidence in our experience of the existence of God, and there's evidence against the existence of God in the form of evil. So the world, if the world is ambiguous, can't reasonable, rational people assess and weigh the evidence differently, arriving at different conclusions about the existence of God? That seems entirely possible. And it seems to me that that's what Rowe is emphasizing. Let's look at the rationality of each other's beliefs and downplay what we take to be the truth or falsity. And maybe that will build not only respect, mutual respect, but also perhaps a more personal form of friendliness. I thought of an analogy here. You may have heard the expression that political liberals often use. They say to their opponents or those with whom they disagree, "You're wrong, but I respect you and I will defend to the death, maybe, your right to believe and say what you will. That's the position a political liberal tends to take. Right? Political liberals live amongst others who don't share their political beliefs. They take the attitude that while the others who disagree with them are wrong, they are to be respected. You're wrong, I disagree with you, and if I had time, I would try to dissuade you from believing what you do, but I do think that you have every right to take the position you have and to defend it and to speak out on it. Right? So the phrase has arisen, I disagree with you, I think you're wrong, but I will defend, perhaps to the death, your right to say it or defend it or endorse it. Now, what would a totalitarian say in contrast to that? A totalitarian, whether we're talking about a left or a right-wing totalitarian, a totalitarian is someone who wants total control over people's behavior and maybe even their beliefs. A totalitarian would say that there's only one acceptable way of life, and everyone must conform to it or else. They don't take the position that the liberal takes, which is live and let live. It's not a mutual respect. The totalitarian says, my way or the highway. The totalitarian says, there's one acceptable way of life, and if you don't adopt it and endorse it, you will be punished, maybe at the extreme, put to death. That's analogous to unfriendly atheism, which says that you're wrong and you're unjustified to boot. Right? You are not only mistaken in what you believe, but you're irrational in what you believe. So there's no tolerance there by the unfriendly atheist. Rowe is analogous to the political liberal. He does make judgments of true and false. He does say flat out to the theist, your belief that God exists is false. But he doesn't go on from there and say, and I'm going to defriend you, I'm going to harm you, or kick you out of polite society, or silence you, or send you to a gulag. Rowe says, even though I think you're wrong, I respect you. I believe that you may well be justified in your belief. I'm going to continue to try to dissuade you from believing it, but it may or may not succeed. I wondered, as I was pursuing this analogy, this political analogy, what would an anarchist be? An anarchist is someone politically who denies the legitimacy of government, who says no government is or could be justified. In epistemology, in philosophy of religion, an anarchist might be someone who says anything goes. Every belief is rationally justified, whatever it may be. Right? It's a kind of promiscuous view. There are no limits in political anarchism. There are no legitimate limits on what you may do. No government is legitimate. No laws are legitimate. No restrictions on your liberty are legitimate. In epistemology, an anarchist would say something like, there are no rational requirements for belief. Any belief is justified, whatever it may be, whatever amount of evidence you may have for it or may not have for it. Okay, I'm going to skip the appendix. It's going to take us far afield. I've got symbolism. BSG is just a capital B, lowercase sg means S believes in God. B stands for the belief relation, and S is the subject, the believing subject, and G is the proposition being believed. So BSG means S believes in God, or believes that God exists. Tilde BSG is the negation of that. It simply says it's not the case that S believes that God exists. We could think of that as non-theism. Right? It's the absence of theistic belief. Now, non-theism divides into two subcategories. There's BS tilde G, which we can think of as positive atheism, not negative, but positive atheism. That says that S believes that there's no God. S believes that God does not exist. And the other possibility is it's not the case that S believes that God does not exist. So you can see that there are three logical categories, which we might call theism, atheism, and agnosticism. Or if you want to call tilde BSG negative atheism, then the three positions would be theism, positive atheism, and agnosticism. And in that way of looking at it, positive atheism and agnosticism would be two different kinds of negative atheism. And if you want an analogy, you take a watch. I don't have my watch on right now, although you can see where I usually wear it because of my bicycling. This is not a watch I wear, but a wristband. This is where I wear my Garmin that keeps track of my mileage and my elapsed time. But that's where I wear my watch when I wear it as well. So what if I had, what are the possibilities? We could divide the world into two categories: people who have a watch and people who don't have a watch. And we can further subdivide the category people who don't have a watch into people who have a, let me start over. Let's divide the world into two categories. People who have a blue watch, blue, the color blue, people who have a blue watch, and people who don't have a blue watch. Okay? Now, let's focus on that second category, people who do not have a blue watch. We can divide that category into people who have no watch at all and people who have a non-blue watch. People who have a non-blue watch. So there are three categories of people in the world, and everybody has to go in one of these three categories, and nobody can go into more than one category, at least with respect to the same watch. So we have people who have a blue watch, think of them as theists. We have people who have a non-blue watch, think of them as atheists. And we have people who have no watch at all. Those you can think of as agnostics. Okay? So I came up with that analogy many years ago. Maybe I could come up with a better one, but that'll serve the purpose. Okay, that's enough for today. It was fairly short because the third section of Rowe's essay is shorter than the first one, for example. I think I've covered everything I want to cover. Let me remind you that the exam is Tuesday. Make sure you go into Canvas and take the exam during the 12-hour window. And I'm going to record your next lecture on Wednesday next week. I will get it posted that same day. And when I come to class on Thursday, since I've already lectured, we will spend our time having a discussion on various topics. And I will post those discussion questions probably sometime Wednesday or Wednesday evening. Okay, have a great day. Good luck in your studying. I'll see you one way or another next week.